Hi, and welcome back to my channel. This is the second part of me answering questions from my subscribers. Last week, we dealt with the Middle Ages and the Wars of the Roses. Today, the Tudors will be in the spotlight. And I know what you're thinking. Wait a second. This is the AI voice and not his real voice. He promised us to do these videos in his real voice. I did, and I am sorry. Currently, I cannot say more than 2 sentences without coughing, so I must do it this way.
My voice currently sounds like this, and I guess you can already hear it. It's not as strong as I would like it to be.
Thanks again to everyone who participated. Let's begin. First question. Did Amy Robsart not have her own home? Why was she living where she was living? Who was the owner of the home, and why would he provide it to Amy? And did Robert ever stay there with her, and why or why not? We are starting really easy here, and full of trust that I can explain one of the most mysterious deaths in history. First, a little context for people who don't know who Amy was. She was the wife of Robert Dudley, the favourite of Queen Elizabeth I. Amy lived in Cumnor Place near Oxford. Her servants found her dead at the end of a staircase made out of stone in the manor on September 8, 1560. To this day, we don't know why she fell down the stairs. Every possibility is still on the table. Cumnor Place was part of the former Abingdon Abbey. It wasn't owned either by Robert or Amy. It belonged to the son of a former physician of Henry VIII and Edward VI. He leased it to Sir Anthony Forster, who was not only a friend of Dudley, but also the controller of his private expenses. He let her live there as a favour to his friend. To the question, Amy was the daughter of Sir John Robsart from Norfolk. He was a modest, wealthy gentleman, but nothing compared to Dudley. Amy married up the social and economic ladder. Her family home was Stanfield Hall, which became notorious in the Victorian era for a double murder. Amy's father had built the original complex, which was overhauled in 1792. It was the only home in possession of the family. Amy and Robert as a couple had a few more homes. At first, they lived in the Dudley London family residence Ely Place. They could also use Somerset House, and they owned Hemsby near Yarmouth. After the turmoil that was the 9-day queenship of Lady Jane Grey, they lost everything. Robert had to move into the Tower. Mary had sympathy for Amy and paid for her clothing. After Robert's release from the Tower, they lived on a property from Robert's mother, Jane Guildford. She died in 1555 and left him a lot of debt. It is also believed that Amy stayed some time with her family during Mary's reign. When Elizabeth came to power, Robert lived at court. He got a lot of his property back. Amy resided primarily in the homes of friends and retainers of her husband. She lived for 2 years in Essex. A letter from early 1560 shows that Robert prepared for the relocation of her wife to Cumnor Place. He chose it because it was free and far away from London. His wife didn't mean a problem for his relationship with the Queen. He wanted her out of the way to fulfill his ambitions at court. Cumnor Place served this purpose. If it did it in a very sinister way as well, is everyone's guess. There is no strong evidence that Robert ever stayed for longer periods of time with her, or at all, to be honest. He paid for an expensive funeral. All right, moving on. Second question. Were Amy and Robert happily married? Could he have had her murdered, thinking he could be free to marry Elizabeth? And what else does history know about her background, life, and times? I can't tell you everything that history knows about her. This would be way too much. But I will do full-fledged documentaries about her to make up for it. They were happily married at the beginning. This means from 1550 to 1553. Afterward, Amy visited him when he was in the Tower. This still speaks for a happy marriage. The second Elizabeth was queen. It got worse and worse. Her maid reported that Amy repeatedly prayed to God that he might deliver her from her desperation in her death year. Robert was accused of murder the second she was found dead. I think it's fair to say that both were very unhappy with their marriage in the end. Regarding Robert as the murderer, as I said, everything is still on the table. Moving on. Third question. What did upset the establishment so much about Anne Askew that she was done to death so terribly? What about the Siege of Norwich? For Norwich, I will do a full documentary, so I have to skip the answer here as well. It's on my Edward VI list for a while. Let's talk about Anne. To give context for the people who don't know her, she was burnt at the stake in 1546 as a heretic. Before her execution, she was tortured on the rack, which was unusual for women. Anne was part of the establishment herself. She was from the nobility. Her father was one of the judges who convicted Anne Boleyn. Her brother Edward was educated in the household of Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. This speaks to the fact that the whole family was Protestant, but we don't know for sure. Nevertheless, Anne was part of the Protestant network within the establishment. This made her a target. She knew all the names. Her connections included Queen Catherine Parr and the Seymours. It was more or less known that they were Protestants. As long as they didn't show it in public, they were safe. Bishop Stephen Gardiner began to target these Protestants in the mid-1540s with the blessing of Henry VIII. He hoped that he could force Anne to confess their names. She was never secret about her beliefs. She was forced to marry a Catholic when she was only 15. She refused to take his last name. Furthermore, she also continued to read the English translation of the Bible. Women weren't allowed to do that and could be sentenced to 1 month in prison. Over time, Anne started to intensify her work. She shared forbidden books and connected Protestants. Her husband had her arrested in 1545. She was handed over to him. At the beginning of 1546, she was arrested again. This time, she was interrogated. Responsible was London's Bishop Edmund Bonner. He let her go after 12 days and a hefty bribe, which was nothing short of a miracle. Bonner would move on to earn an infamous reputation as a Protestant hunter under Mary. Anne didn't stop and was arrested again. This happened in May 1546. Since it was her third time, she had the attention of Gardiner, who had understood that Henry VIII was still a Catholic in heart and just wanted to be the Pope of England. He used this to garner ever more influence. During her interrogations, Anne challenged the clerics. She openly rejected key Catholic doctrines and talked back against the theological arguments of the interrogators. She was a highly educated, well-connected woman, refusing to bow to the men of the church. Gardiner wanted to make an example out of her and use her to eliminate the Protestants at court. After the torture, Anne wasn't able to stand or walk. In a sense, Gardiner got what he wished for. She became a symbol. Tower Constable Thomas Kingston, who had tortured her the first time, refused to do it again. Henry VIII pardoned him for this refusal to obey the orders. Anne remained silent about other Protestants, but still stood to her beliefs openly. She was deemed mad by the authorities to explain why they failed and to try to prevent her from becoming a martyr for the Protestants, which did not succeed. There is a book called The Examinations of Anne Askew that I recommend for people interested in learning more about her. Moving on. Fourth and last question. I want to know if Henry VIII was a beloved king in his time, or if everyone hated him like we do. This is one of the most asked questions about Henry not touching one of the wives. Henry was a beloved king at the beginning of his reign. In fact, the people were enthusiastic about this new young king replacing his old father, who had become bitter. He was a supporter of the arts, well-educated, good-looking, and charismatic. Even so, his support shrank over time. He remained quite popular for the first 20 years of his reign. Then, the English Reformation happened. Catholics started to have problems with him. Officially, they were against his evil counselors. But of course, it was also a message to Henry himself. The Pilgrimage of Grace was the greatest threat to his reign. At the same time, Protestants also started to see him in a different light. They had hoped for much more regarding the Reformation. As we know, he became tyrannic over time. He executed more of his people than every other Tudor monarch. This also influenced his popularity. He was feared. But there was never a general hate against him. Henry was better than most kings to integrate the Parliament into his political plans. He repeatedly hired common people because of their talents. This earned him admiration throughout his reign. The comparison with today is difficult. If you live in England and don't have a high opinion on King Charles, you can publish it in any way you wish. Do it in Henry's time, and you at least get an unpleasant talk with the authorities. We are used to being able to express ourselves freely. We sometimes forget how much of a privilege that is. We don't know how scary it must feel to articulate the hate against your king just in your thoughts. If you know these feelings can get you killed in horrific ways. That's it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to help my channel.